Okay, good afternoon, good evening, and even possibly good morning to all you Druids out there. Welcome to the final session of our very first virtual Druid Summit. My name is Rachel Podreski, and I lead our developer relations team here at Imply. This has been a full day of fantastic content. We've had over 1,000 people registered for the event with 7 talks throughout the day. This is our final talk. We're having a Apache Druid Fireside chat or Ask Me Anything session with 3 very special panelists, which I will let them introduce themselves in just a second. So without further ado, I will go ahead and let FJ, Gian, and Vadim introduce themselves.
Thanks for that, Rachel. Hey, everybody. My name is FJ. I am one of the original authors behind Druid. I've been working on it since the very beginning. I'm also a co-founder and a CEO at Imply, which is sponsoring this conference, as well as driving a lot of the development on Druid today. It's great for all of you, and I want to thank all of you guys for attending.
Hey everybody, I'm GM Merlino. I'm also one of the co-founders at Imply. That's gonna get old because that's who the 3 of us are. I have not been working on Druid since the very beginning because Fengjin actually hired me to work on Druid after he'd already built the prototype. But he did hire me before it was open source, so I've at least got that going for me. And today I am just a Druid person.
Yeah, hi everybody, and Vadim here, another co-founder of Imply and longtime Druid user, first Druid user in the universe actually, worked with the system since basically day 1, and always been focused on stuff around Druid, like how to query it better, how to interact with it, how to build good user experiences on top of it. And I'm very excited because I recently became a Druid contributor through through the work that we did on the web console that is not part of Druid. So no longer just a user.
Well, fantastic. Thank you guys so much for joining us today. So as I mentioned, we can go ahead and raise your hand if you want to ask one of these gentlemen a question or put a question in the Q&A box. We've got a few questions already, and again, I apologize if I don't say your name correctly, but we're going to start with Stephen Chen. You are unmuted, Stephen.
I still see the little mute icon.
Yeah, I can't see. It's not letting me.
Maybe well, you're allowed to unmute yourself, maybe.
Yeah, try unmuting yourself. Okay, well, that's all right. We'll move on to the next one. We do have a question from an anonymous attendee saying, where do you see Druid in 5 years? It's probably a good question for Gian.
Oh my God, 5 years is such a long time. Well, in 5 years, Druid will probably, like all software, become part of the global Skynet that will be the destruction of all of us. So that's 5 years. But I would say that the road to that is interesting. It does, the road to that. I think that 1 or 2 years from now, it becomes something that's, I don't know if you caught my my session at the beginning, but it becomes something that's able to handle a lot more than it can today. It's able to handle not just your like super fast real-time use cases, but also, give you a nice seamless experience as the temperature of your data goes up and down. And then it becomes Skynet along with everything else.
Okay, we have Garesh, a software developer from Hotwire. He wants to know, what are the best Java clients Imply recommends for Druid?
I guess that is a good question. Let's see. JDBC, I guess. That's the J stands for Java, so the story checks out. That's the final answer, JDBC.
Yeah, I think at present right now, JDBC is the one that we've put the most effort into like supporting, and it's gonna offer like the best end user experience. Um, it really depends on your use case of like what client that you ultimately want to use. If for some reason your application or your end users don't like using SQL, there's always the option of writing your own or looking at what else is out there. But in terms of our development roadmap and what we're focused on, JDBC is by far the largest priority.
Fantastic. What is the best way of learning Druid? Are there any training programs?
Yeah, so I can answer that. I mean, there's a variety of ways of learning it. There's the way that we've seen most community members kind of start with it is you start with a quick start. So you can download Druid, you can run it on your own laptop, load some basic data sets, and get an understanding of what the system can and cannot do today. Obviously, the single server, kind of single laptop experience is going to be constrained because there's only so much data that you can work with and so much velocity of queries that you can handle. So the next kind of logical step is moving towards a distributed cluster. And there's a lot of documentations about that. There's a couple of videos about it as well. Druid is fundamentally a distributed system and kind of meant to work across multiple servers. Now, in terms of like learning more about like what does the architecture of the system look like, how do the various components work, what are some of the nuts and bolts, and how does everything get together? At Imply, we actually have a full-blown Druid University. There's a bunch of videos kind of covering a variety of different topics related to Druid. They cover how does ingestion work, how does querying work, and how does the architecture work, how do you do backups, and everything kind of in between. So yeah, there's a lot of community materials. There's some official stuff that's been created by Imply. There's also multiple community channels, including the Druid Forum, as well as a Slack channel that a lot of people hang out in. They're just places to ask questions.
I think follow us on social media because we release a lot of videos about Druid. In fact, I'm currently working on a video about joins, which is a new feature that's coming into the upcoming Druid 018, and we'll be posting and tweeting about that when that happens. So that's a good way to stay up to date with the latest features.
So one of our Druid community superstars, Itai from Nielsen, has a question. In a session earlier today, Gian mentioned Druid 1.0 in a few words. Can you maybe elaborate on what that is in terms of features as well as a very rough timeline?
Yeah, you're muted.
Yeah, I figured it out. Let's see. Well, I was being a little bit vague on purpose because as a community project, what will become Druid 1.0 and when it will happen is ultimately a community decision. I've definitely got my opinions on that, and my opinions revolve around rounding out a lot of the functionality that we have. So really making that native batch experience work really well, so you can load files from wherever they are without needing external systems. Having a really super modern lightning fast query engine, and rounding out SQL functionality, so we can do a lot of the things that people want to do with SQL. So those are my personal opinions, and I think that's all doable within the next couple of releases.
So is there, Priam has asked, in the roadmap, is there any plan to allow Druid query directly from deep storage? This will help bringing down the query cost to cold data.
Definitely something that we have been thinking seriously about. I'll say that.
What feature post open sourcing did you guys enjoy developing the most?
Well, I guess we could each answer that separately, huh? I think for me, it would have to be, I think it's almost a tie between Druid SQL, because those of you that are newbies to Druid may not remember a time when Druid did not speak SQL at all. It does now. It actually has for a while, but building that was pretty fun. And building the vectorization layer was also pretty fun and rewarding. Even though neither of those things is fully done, neither of them is a complete project. They're both complete enough that they're providing value to people, and that's satisfying.
Yeah, because open sourcing was a couple of years ago, and like I haven't done anything technical for a couple of years. This is like a really interesting question of
We've done some stuff.
yeah, I mean, over the last couple of years, I haven't written a line of code, but I still look at the overall architecture as much as I can. But going back to when I actually used to write a lot of code, I'm actually trying to remember when inverted indexes were first introduced to Druid, if they were introduced pre or post open source. But I thought that was like actually pretty novel at the time.
I think it was pre, because I think they were there. I think they were there when you hired me, and that was before open source.
Remember when hyperloglog was introduced?
I think that was right around that time. I think it was also pre-open source.
I think like the first time, I remember right around the time we were open sourcing, we started looking at approximation algorithms for making certain expensive queries cheaper. And at that time, like there were very novel like concepts. So we looked at hyperloglog, I think right after the paper came out as a way of being able to approximate uniques. I think Druid was the first, if not one of the first systems to introduce hyperloglog as a way of like doing count distinct. And I remember that being a pretty fun project from way back when.
Vadim?
Yeah, and for me, I mean, I think at a high level, my favorite feature that went into Druid is the web console. I'm a little biased. It's really my only contribution to the project other than testing and stuff like that. And kind of like Big Lebowski style, it's like the rug that really ties the room together. But within the web console, if you are inclined to separate within that as its own things, then I'm really fond of the data loader. Because actually before the data loader, I keep saying I was like a user of Druid, I would query it a lot, but loading data into Druid was something I always like considered to be like beyond me. I'm like, oh my God, how does it get in there? It really made it such that for myself, I can kind of go in and just load the data set just randomly. I find the CSV online, I load it into a Druid cluster. So it changed my experience of Druid, and I hope it changed the experience of many people that get started with Druid for the first time.
And do you want to talk to us about, is there a way to use the new console UI with the older Druid versions?
Yeah, so that's a great question that comes up a lot. The short answer is no. The longer answer is no. The reality is that the web console, one of the cool things about it, one of the reasons we can iterate so quickly on it, and one of the reasons we keep it so fresh and up to date is that it is bundled with Druid, and specifically by design only works with the version of Druid that it comes with. So whichever one you have is the one that like it will support all the features of the Druid that you have. And Druid gets features added to it so quickly, it would simply be an untenable project to keep it do very sophisticated version checking there. And then if you start looking at older Druids, anything beyond like 0.13, I think, or 0.14, there were no system tables for SQL, and the web console uses those very, very aggressively. So basically, we've been putting a lot of work into making Druid easier to use, not just through the web console, but through the APIs. And the web console is just the 10% of the iceberg that's floating above the water. The real work is actually going into Druid itself. And as a result, no, please upgrade.
So no. Got it. There was a question earlier today regarding moving away from the JSON API to SQL. Why is that?
Because everybody knows SQL.
Yeah,
that's the short answer.
Maybe a more elaborate answer to that. The JSON API is, I think, good for certain workloads and not good for others. The workloads in which it is potentially good for are ones in which you're like programmatically generating queries. And JSON is the language of the web, and if you have some sort of application that speaks JSON, then there are benefits of being able to issue native queries to Druid in the form of JSON. The longer answer there is kind of the drawbacks, I should say, of that is JSON is extraordinarily difficult to write by hand. And it's also difficult to kind of build a query layer to actually query Druid using JSON. And part of the reason is that it's not a very standard format. And you have to read a lot of documentation if you wanted to start doing some of the more powerful features. So as it's been mentioned a couple of times, one of the big goals of the project is to really simplify the whole shebang, like simplify querying, simplify architecture, simplify deployment. And SQL is just a very well understood language that people don't have to read a whole lot of docs or have to do a whole bunch to get up and running.
I think we figured out how to unmute people. So we've got a question from the audience.
Hi, my name is Ravi. I work at MOB and I am a data infra architect here. So we are working on a Druid project here. This was a POC environment. Now we plan to migrate to a real hardware. The question is, during this migration, it will be basically moving away everything which is existing. And our deep storage is HDFS. So we know that might be easy. Is there anything we need to consider about the meta store? In our case, we are using Postgres. So will there be any conflict with the host name changing or any other known issues around that? If you can, guide. Thank you.
Yeah, that's definitely an advanced topic because the official answer is if you're switching to a new cluster, then it is simplest if you just start fresh and re-ingest everything. But if you want to move stuff that's already been ingested and you don't mind getting your hands a bit dirty, then you actually can do it by editing the metadata store directly. Assuming you only want to move over data that's been ingested and you don't want to move over your ingestion pipelines and supervisors and stuff like that, you only need to look at the Druid segments table. And it should be pretty straightforward to understand. It's not documented because, like I said, it's not an official capability. But you can see that there's paths in there to your HDFS stuff. And if you look at what's actually stored in that table, then it should hopefully become clear what you need to do.
Thank you.
Great. So we had a question about is there any tools you'd recommend for benchmarking performance of Druid clusters to help with tuning cluster settings, segment sizing, etc.?
Well, it's very open-ended. So I guess an open-ended answer would be for benchmarking tools, Druid's a HTTP API, so I would use standard HTTP benchmarking stuff. We use a lot of JMeter around here, but other things work fine too. And as far as tuning and optimizing for specific queries or for specific data sets, what I always say is start by just kind of following the best practices. We've actually added a lot of best practices around data modeling to our documentation in the latest release, 017. So if you haven't seen those, go check them out. A lot of them are pretty new in terms of being more detailed. A lot of it boils down to, you want your segments to be about a few million rows. If you're often partitioning on something, or so if you're often filtering on something, you want to partition by it. And there's a few other tips like that. And so that's kind of step one is doing all that stuff. And then step two, it gets very specific to what you're actually trying to do. And it's not really possible to answer in an open-ended way, unfortunately. But you start really narrowing in on the specific queries you're doing.
So Paolo from NTT says, what's the good, the bad, and the ugly for creating a stack of tools like Druid and Pivot? You can pick one each, he says.
The good and the bad. Who wants to do the good and the bad and the ugly?
Yeah.
I'll do the ugly.
Okay, you do the ugly. I guess, Fangs, you want to do the good and I'll do the bad?
You know, I'd like to hear, Gian, kind of what's your good, what's your bad, maybe what's your good, bad.
Oh, I
What's
want to do all three. Okay.
yeah.
Let's see. Well, I guess the good is you get to create something that actually helps people, that helps people do their jobs, which is something that I enjoy personally. I think that, you know, people have enough work to do as it is, and if you can help them be more productive by making tools for them, then that's great. So that's the good. Um, I think what's the bad? I don't know. Bad's hard. Is anything bad, really? I don't think so. I got to get back to that one. The ugly, there's a lot of that. Ugly is just the details, man. The details about, you know, getting your testing right, getting your QA right, trying to ship releases without any bugs, trying to make sure you cover all the edge cases. You know, software development is a ugly business. And there's a lot of smart people that put a lot of time into trying to make it a little bit less ugly.
Yeah. I guess to kind of reiterate what I think is the good, it's definitely developing something that creates value. That's always been the primary motivation, and the focus of our roadmaps as well is always to think about, like, what are the things that we're going to work on that's going to be able to create the most amount of value. And like the bad, I feel is directly spawns from that is that you hear a lot about a lot of specific use cases and specific requests from all different types of organizations and all different companies, like both large and small. And I think one of the hardest parts about building a roadmap is to take everyone's consideration and with limited people, limited resources, try and build a roadmap that's going to solve as many problems as possible. But it is impossible to like solve everyone's problem, and like you want to solve everyone's problem, but it's just like very, very difficult to do so. And then I don't know, I don't really have anything that's like the ugly. But definitely I think the bad of balancing like having a balanced diet for the roadmap is one of the like largest challenges. Not of just of us,
I
but
didn't
like
have a bad
project out there.
Maybe Vad won't have a good.
Well, I think I have a good ugly one, which is which kind of ties into what I was saying before. I think one of the ugly things about developing like a stack like Druid and Pivot is like the details of having to deal with different versions of like, so Pivot can work on top of different versions of Druid, and it's what it has to do to actually make that work is pretty complicated. And one of the cool things about the web console that ships with Druid, and I want to like write a treatise about how like every UI should be just built into the system it's built to serve, is that it kind of like doesn't have to work with every version of Druid, and can really focus on the features that version of Druid provides. Makes both testing easier. Well, or the ugly is that it's very hard to test like a UI that can work with so many versions of a database that is evolving so quickly to a point where it's changing from a JSON to a SQL, and the SQL is evolving API. So that's my ugly.
We have a lot of questions here about geospatial support. Would somebody like to address what the sort of the ideas are behind geospatial support in Druid?
John, you want to take that?
I think that's gotta be a question for you, Fangjin. I've never worked on that. That was all you.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I wrote the first version of geospatial support in Druid, and that early version was, I think, more a prototype than anything else. It was the ability to filter data based on a shape, and like a shape of a particular size. Over time, I think as I've learned more about how people are treating geospatial data and like what makes sense, I think the first model that I developed could use a lot of improvement. The first model uses like longitude and latitude, which I actually think is unscalable for like real data sets. I think the better method is to actually have better geohash support in Druid. So you're not familiar with geohash, it's basically taking a latitude and longitude and effectively creating a hash string from it. And like that can be done at like different granularities. And I think more native support for geohash in Druid would be the direction that we want to move in. The timeline of that is a very like kind of open question. Obviously, if people in the community were interested in working on that, we have a lot of ideas about how we could bring better geohash support to Druid. If no one's like interested in kind of picking up the keyboard, then the priority of which we're gonna like focus more on better geo support is gonna be balanced by, as I mentioned, kind of the hardest problem, which is balanced by the million other things that we're getting feedback on, and trying to prioritize them to create the maximum amount of value. I hope that's a satisfying enough answer, but if not, happy to go into more detail.
All right, so we have some questions on security features. So what ideas do you have to handle PII?
That is also very open-ended, but I guess I'll answer it in a little bit of a less open-ended way. I guess in my experience, especially in the last year or two, when people are asking about handling PII, they are often coming from a place of wanting to be compliant with privacy regulations that have come up in places like Europe and California and so on. And a lot of that involves right to be forgotten and that kind of stuff. And when it comes to what you use Druid for, you use Druid for analytics. When it comes to analytical systems, it mostly comes down to how do you delete stuff? How do you delete stuff and how do you scrub stuff? And the answer in Druid is that you do it using a background job. So you have a background job that runs periodically, and maybe every every couple of weeks, that goes through and scrubs any request that came in the last couple of weeks, is what most people would do. I'm not sure if that answers the question. Is open-ended, and I kind of took it in a specific direction, but hopefully it does.
All right, so Abhishek, who's one of our speakers today from Cisco, and he's asking, what is your upstream contribution strategy between internal development and Imply versus open source contributions, and how do you strike the right balance?
You want to take that, Pington?
Or should I?
You should take that.
Yeah. So right. So this is obviously a question for both Druid as well as Imply. Philosophically, the way that we've always thought about Imply's product is its value add is to offer a much more complete solution around a core engine. So the way I've always thought about the balance is, you can sell an engine or you can sell a car, and a car tends to be much more value adding to a lot of end consumers. So at Imply, we strive actually to keep the engine open. And if, for folks out there that want to build, metaphorically their own car, they're free to do so. And at Imply, we have one that's kind of pre-built already. So our product includes visualization, obviously our version of the engine, there's deployment, there's management, there's security, there's monitoring, there's alerting, and there's a lot of value-added features. And the end goal of that product is to potentially be able to solve problems for our customers right out of the box. And with regards to Druid, I've spent my nights and weekends building the community and engaging with the community back when the community was much smaller for many years. And it's always been my goal to keep the engine open, to create value in the engine, to add cool new features. Gian mentioned with 018, joins are coming. That's a pretty critical feature for a lot of people, and we explicitly made the decision, we should keep that open and make sure that, we're doing right by the community.
Well, from request, speaking about the new console, how has the community reacted? We have one person says he doesn't like it, and another person says that they do.
Vad, you want to talk about the feedback you've heard? That just disconnected.
Or he
I'll
doesn't.
answer that. I'll answer like why we built the console and the goals that it's meant to solve. So like one of the like high level goals that we want to do with Druid is as part of kind of our ease of use roadmap is we want to have more interactions be UI driven as opposed to like generating JSON or doing things like programmatically. UIs are just tools that you know, if designed well, can provide a much better experience. So the console was meant to solve those problems, and it's meant to be a kind of single UI for a lot of different functions. So some of those functions include like data loading. So there's a visual data loader. The idea is you kind of connect to different sources of raw data and you pull that data into Druid. There's now increasingly more kind of operational features in the console. So there's a way of seeing your data sources, your segments, and so on and so forth. I wrote the original console in Druid, the old one that's from like way back when, and a lot of people still use. And I know that console like basically fails to scale completely and falls flat on its face when you get into like some pretty massive workloads. So the new console is meant not just as an easy use, but it scales much better. It uses underlying system tables in Druid, so it actually has a lot more metadata, a lot more information about the cluster than what exists in any kind of previous consoles. And the goal is we want to do a lot more with that console. It's set up such that you can add, we can go in a lot of really interesting directions, like potentially adding visualization components, potentially adding, you know, other sort of value-added components in there as well.
And this is a fun one, I think, for you, FJ. To the very early Druid developers, in retrospect, would you have built Druid in a different language, say Golang?
I'll tell you why Druid was built in Java. So one was about being able to run the software in a lot of different environments. We really liked Java for that, for those capabilities. Also, we really like Java because we want to build a community. We wanted other people to contribute. And Java is one of the most popular development languages in the world. So I think to that end, you know, there's been a lot of successes with Java. If you look at other, you know, analytics data projects that are JVM-based languages, Kafka being one of them, I think that's Kafka, that might be in Scala, but still a JVM-based language. And then Elastic, I think, is in a JVM-based language. They've all scaled pretty well. You know, sometimes memory management can be a little bit of a pain, but for the most part, it's controlled. And I think for the goal of, you know, just writing in a language that people can understand and more easily contributed to, it was a good decision. If I could do it again, would I pick Java? I think it would be a toss-up between like Java versus like C++. I think there are a couple of benefits that C++ brings that Java doesn't have today. Yeah, I don't know how you would answer that.
I would say that for like 90% of Druid, I like writing it in Java, and Java feels like a very productive language to write in. And for the 10%, that is like the really, you know, low-level performance critical stuff. You know, it can sometimes feel like you're fighting against the Java environment and just trying to bend it to your will in really unnatural ways. And that's less pleasant. But for that stuff, actually, the vectorized query engine that we're putting out is one dream project I have is to leverage that engine in order to make it so the actual low-level processing that's happening of those individual blocks of data might be doable in another language, maybe even with code that's compiled dynamically during a query. You can do cool stuff like that.
It looks like we
and
have
then, and then the rest of it, you know, the 90% of the rest of the code that's doing stuff like IPC and distributed system stuff can stay in Java, which is, I think, a great language for it.
We want to welcome back Vadim. So with expanding Druid to support a richer feature set and expense to more relaxed performance guarantees, how can we make sure that the core functionality remain fast performing? Will we need to mark which features are not hot compliant? Can both workload types coexist in the same cluster?
That is a really interesting question. Yeah, I mean, I think that having them both exist in the same cluster is definitely the goal. And in 018, we're putting out a query laning feature. And the idea behind that query laning feature is to power this kind of stuff, to power clusters where you have heterogeneous workloads in terms of how much resources different queries want. The idea is you have this carpool lane and the regular lane, and the high speed hot queries can stay in the carpool lane, and they are not blocked by the the masses of more warm and less hot compliant stuff that's happening in the other lanes, and they can coexist in the same system and even the same servers. So that would be the idea.
So let's see. Our deployment, a lot of people I've heard from today use regular batch ingestion or re-ingestions. Is it planned to have that type of functionality for scheduling recurring tasks in Druid? Currently, they're always managed externally.
I want to answer that, and then maybe you can give your long answer. I mean,
I was just going to talk about how that was the first thing I worked on when you hired me. I didn't actually work on Druid.
I know.
I worked on a thing for scheduling Druid tasks.
No, I think you can give your answer. Maybe I'll give my answer. The short answer is like very much so. It's actually something I bring up like constantly. With the introduction of supervisors, the goal was always to have kind of supervised both streaming and like batch ingestion. So today you have like supervisors that can like, watch like Kafka or like Kinesis topics. But like the framework we tried to lay out the framework such that in the future we can have like basically supervised batch ingestion. And the idea behind supervised batch ingestion is if your raw data kind of changes within your file system, then Druid would automatically re-index that data, and like the changes would propagate and show up. So that's always been the goal. It's actually in our, I don't know if Gian like talked about the longer term roadmap, but like the longer term roadmap going out more than a few months, that's definitely something that we want to do. And Gian, you can give your answer there.
No, I didn't have much to add other than just the anecdote that I had worked on a system that did that. It was close source.
Yeah, but it'll be
sadly.
native to Druid. It is something we definitely want to do. It's, when you hear people ask about security or like funnels or geospatial or operational simplicity, it's just different balls that we have to juggle. And one of those balls is definitely like supervised batch ingestion.
Yeah, by the way, in the meantime, check out Airflow. I'm not sure if you're already using it, but it is Apache Airflow. It's a job scheduler for that works with a lot of big data stuff and has some integration with Druid.
Excellent. So we've heard a lot about visualization and dashboarding tools on top of Druid. Are there any plans to further improve Druid's integration with Superset, or alternatively, to include built-in visualization tools as part of the Apache Druid project? It seems like this is a natural extension.
Yeah, you want to take that one? Because I talked a bunch about the console and how the console is setting up for more cool stuff potentially in the future.
All I want to say about the second part of that question about visualization in the console is keep your eyes open. That's all I'm going to say right now. Stay tuned. And then about the superset thing, that we actually don't do a ton of work in the Druid community that's specifically geared towards supporting superset. That's usually more work that's being done on the superset side of the house. And there are, there's people that are committers on both projects, and there's cross-talk between the communities, but most of that work is being driven on the superset side of the house.
Yeah, there was a question about dashboards not working from Superset, but I think that's a better question to take to email or the Google groups, and we can help you work through that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, because I know we have like 5 minutes left. Maybe we can do like a question or two more. But I'm reading through some of the question lists. I know there's like more in-depth like technical questions. And my comment there is, there's a lot of other opportunities to get those like questions answered. I actually want to try and be able to answer everything, but there's too many questions. I think some of the more in-depth technical questions, there's people in the ASF Slack channel, and there's other events and other mediums, such as the Google user groups as well, in which we can help answer many of those questions. And definitely, please follow up with those questions. We want to make sure that they get answered.
Yeah, specifically, we've been doing meetups this last month since Meetup has allowed us to do virtual ones. Specifically with Gian doing Ask Me Anythings that answer these particular type of questions, and we are going to continue to do those throughout, maybe more of an office hours, so we're not just all relying on Gian, but get other people to answer questions too. So
Yeah, they're fun.
So yeah, so some of these technical questions, I know we didn't get a chance to answer them today. I was trying to keep the questions to more vision and roadmap, but we are more than happy to try to answer those questions. We will keep a list of all these questions, and we will try to reply to them in either to you individually or through a blog post as a follow-up to this virtual Druid Summit. So yeah, we are kind of running low on time, and we finally got Vadim back.
Yeah, sorry about that. My computer just died. So I'm dialing in from my phone right now.
So I guess the last thing is, what are your final words to close out our first virtual Druid Summit from each one of you guys? What is your tips and tricks? How can you help?
Yeah, maybe I can say a few things and then Gian and Vad. So my general thought is obviously we wanted to do the summit in person, and our original agenda is like 40 some different presentations. We still want to do a full-blown Druid Summit. We obviously want to do that at a point in time in which the world is a little bit more normal. But we didn't want to wait 6 months or 8 months or however long it might take. So this virtual Druid Summit, was a way to do kind of a mini event, and then also to be able to engage with the community. It's a pretty crazy time out there right now, but definitely appreciate kind of everyone taking a couple hours of your day, even if it's just 45 minutes to attend this session, just to come hang out and ask a few questions. On the roadmap side of things, we are working very, very hard on taking Druid to the next level. Gian kind of presented our big vision goals, but we're working on performance, we're working on ease of use, and we're working on features, and we're working at those at a pretty blistering pace. So from version to version, you should hopefully see some pretty major updates. And we're moving very, very close to Druid 1.0. And I think 1.0 is also going to bring a whole lot of goodies with it. The community feedback is extraordinarily important. I read pretty much everything that gets posted in ASF Slack. I don't have time to respond to it anymore. I work way too many hours, but I try and read everything. I actually try and spend as much time as I can still on my nights and weekends to read through what are people talking about in the community groups, and the feedback is very, very important. We actually see all of it. Sometimes we may not be able to respond as fast as we'd like, but we see all of it, and believe me when I say that we are working very, very hard to address as much of that feedback as possible. Cool. So that's from my side. Gian, thoughts?
Yeah, I think you said a lot of great things that that I don't. As a result, I don't have as much to say. I guess I would just say, stay tuned for a couple of things. Keep your eyes up for a couple of things. One of them is Druid 018, which is going to drop in a few days, and our best release ever, like all our releases. And the other one is, yeah, the other one is stay tuned for more of these virtual events, like Rachel was mentioning. I think that these times when we're all quarantined in our homes and finding new ways of working and all that stuff, new ways of connecting as a community. We hadn't really done many virtual events before this whole pandemic situation started, but they've actually been pretty fun. And we have a bunch more scheduled, and check out the Druid website for info on what's coming up.
Yeah, and keep being plugged into the community, share your use cases, and also share feedback about what you like and what you don't like about Druid. So I
also want to say that I'm sorry to everybody that we didn't get to we answered 23 questions, looks like, but there's still 33 open. Oh my God. It feels like there was 30 open the entire time. But I wish we could have got to all of them, because they're actually all things that I would love to be able to talk about for a few minutes each. But that's why I'm saying stay tuned for future events, because there's more.
Yeah, and there was a
And
one last
also like FJ said, we're all in the Slack channel.
Yeah.
We're on the Slack channel and we're on the mailing list. And these are a lot of the stuff I'm seeing here is stuff that would be a great conversation to have online in between events.
There's one last question about how we engage with the community. So we'll send out more information about that, but the very quick answer is if you go to the Druid webpage, there's a community tab. It includes like links to pretty much all the places where you can engage with the community, and we're active in all those places.
Well, thank you guys. We really appreciate your time today. Thank everybody that's on the phone that's bared with us for 7 sessions of all Druid all the time. You know, everybody wash your hands and stay safe out there. Thanks, everybody.
Stay healthy, everyone. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye. Thank you, everybody.